Welcome to the NeverFell Projects. Believe it or not, this is actually the end of an idea, not the beginning of one. This series, if it gets as far as it needs to, will basically outline what my RWBY NeverFell AU was supposed to be, by summarizing the journeys of all the major characters, kind of like what I did with the Ozpin and Salem videos. But what makes this series different? This time around, I'm going to start discussing these characters together. Back when I first started planning how I could wrap things up with NeverFell, something I did to sort of streamline the character writing was to give most of the major characters a project in another character. Basically, I have characters develop in pairs and small groups, playing them off of each other to make my job as a writer, or at least a concept writer, a lot easier. So, to start this series off, I'm going to talk about the pair of projects I had the most fun coming up with, Adam Taurus and Cinder. I think what made this such an enjoyable creative exercise was grappling with the fact that, in the canon, these are two of the most hated characters among RWBY critics. Cinder has been almost universally disliked since Volume 5, when the writers blindly threw away what could have been an interesting and pivotal character development for her. Rather than forcing a pompous, know-it-all character to face her failures and rebuild herself, likely replacing her unwavering confidence with an insecure, self-destructive desire for revenge, instead, they simply hit the old factory reset button on her personality. And to rub extra salt in the wound, the very next thing they did was to have her ignore her established hatred for the main character to instead target their favorite supporting character, and make him scream and cry and force him to unlock his special power, cementing Cinder's role as a mere narrative tool to cause drama, rather than a person with her own desires and goals. Now Adam, on the other hand, has been a mess of terrible decisions since the early volumes. Although most people point to Volume 5 as the start of Adam's downfall, I honestly feel like the character destruction began in Volume 3, when he suddenly started calling Blake my love and my darling. Like, whether you think Adam and Blake's relationship should have been romantic or not, these weird add-ons don't make him sound threatening. They make him sound corny and embarrassing, like he's trying way too hard. In stark contrast to the effortlessly cool, concise dialogue that he'd been given up to that point. For me personally, this was the point at which I stopped taking him seriously. And then, of course, the rest of his character progression was just the writers showcasing their lack of understanding of the civil rights movement, or any of the depth and complexity of racism and discrimination in general. And finally, weaseling their way out of the hole they dug themselves into by flattening Adam's character into a crazy ex-boyfriend, making him easier to write and easier to kill off, without realizing that having a mindless Blake obsession take precedence over his more realistic aspirations is actually still pretty offensive, and doesn't make their failures with the White Fang magically disappear. But whatever, it's done, he's dead, so apparently we should all just shut up about him now. Anyway, both Adam and Cinder are characters who were clearly set up to be intimidating antagonistic forces for the main cast to deal with, but ultimately failed to live up to that purpose, as their roles in the story flattened over time. The showrunners didn't really want a complex Ship of Theseus-style take on the classic femme fatale, or an equally complex civil rights revolutionary who could provide intense social commentary on the world of Remnant. They wanted a hot evil lady and a hot evil guy, and in the end, that's what we got. Two edgy visual aesthetics pretending to be characters for as long as they could. Fortunately, I love edgy visual aesthetics. And in a weird, twisted way, I also kinda love the specific ways these characters decayed over the course of the story. In theory, an antagonist who stubbornly refuses to learn from her mistakes, and an antagonist who lets his giant ego undermine all his goals, could be super interesting. All you have to do is acknowledge these character flaws, decide what you want the characters to learn from them, and write in character progression that gets them there. There's a lot about these two characters' overall concepts that had to be changed before I even got to this point. For Cinder, most of that is covered in the summary video I made for my Midnight comic series. There's a link in the description if you want to check that out. But basically, this version of Cinder has been raised by Salem since she escaped the glass unicorn as a young teen. So she has a much closer relationship to her mother figure that will help shape her story going forward, especially now that what should have been her first big victory became her first big failure, since Beacon is still standing. Now, my version of Cinder's character is largely defined by her fiery temper. That smug, sexy attitude is still there, but she's much quicker to drop the attitude to lash out at people, and to visibly brood and seethe over her failures and frustrations. I think this makes her a little more transparent than she is in the canon, and I mean that in a good way. These visceral reactions create a clear record of what makes her angry and insecure, allowing the audience to make inferences about her values and opinions. Even if she still doesn't tell us outright why she wants power, even if she's still a mysterious femme fatale, at least now we have clues to who she really is. Now, as for Adam, I don't think I've ever really gone into detail about how I write him before. Well, it looks like now's the time. So, my version of Adam's character is primarily defined by his childishness. He's still his usual badass self when he fights, but outside of that, he's almost a comic relief character. As the newcomer to Salem's forces, he doesn't really know what's going on a lot of the time, and he has a lot of over-the-top reactions to things. This characterization is mostly because I think his increasingly goofy outbursts over the course of the series were actually hilarious.
What does she even see in you?
I know it's awful writing, I know it makes him sound like a pathetic clown when he's supposed to be at his most threatening. But in a weird way, I kinda love it, and I feel like it adds an interesting dimension to his character. In my opinion, this side of Adam is the reason why he's the beast. It's not just because he has sadistic tendencies and a powerful semblance. It's because he lacks the maturity to control any of it. He's provoked to violence over the pettiest things. He gets so wrapped up in his emotions that he doesn't even realize how ridiculous he sounds. The mask slips, and all of a sudden we see the scared, selfish, traumatized child hiding underneath that cool exterior. Of course, there are better ways to blend these two sides of Adam together into a truly complex character, as in better than the unfortunate mess we got in the canon show. And I hope you'll like the one I decided to try. As I've mentioned before, I spent more time writing about Adam and his personal journey than I did for any other character in this AU, and I can't deny that he's basically the main character of this story. So, without any further ado, let's dive in. So as we all know, in Neverfell, Beacon never fell, which means both Cinder and Adam have failed spectacularly. Cinder's mission was to kill Headmaster Ozpin, but unfortunately, despite years of training with her semblance and plenty of fire magic gifted to her by Salem, it was a fight that she did not win. Adam, on the other hand, didn't even have a mission. He simply chose to find Blake and teach her a lesson while he was in the area, which led to him getting tag-teamed when Weiss showed up to help her friend. Yes, in Neverfell, Adam's first fight as a villain is between him, Blake, and Weiss. This is to showcase how far the girls' friendship has progressed since they first met, and to give the both of them a good look at Adam's branded face after they defeat him. A solemn moment for Blake, a horrifying shock for Weiss, and the ultimate humiliation for poor Adam. Cinder is the one who may actually face consequences for her failure, and she's not exactly looking forward to it. But on the other hand, Adam has just been embarrassed within an inch of his life. The other half of his weird situationship has clearly moved on without him, and he's beginning to regret ever coming to Vale in the first place. Tensions within both characters are running high, and come close to exploding when Cinder demands that they try again before Salem arrives. Unsurprisingly, the rest of her villain henchmen look at her like she's crazy, but they expect to be forced to go along with it regardless. Adam is the only one who actually stands up to her and says no. He knows she's counting on having the White Fang do all her grunt work again, since they're clearly the largest fighting force she has access to. But he decides they've done enough, and don't need to get themselves mixed up in these human conflicts any further. In his words, the White Fang is for Faunus first, and he has no reason to believe in Cinder's leadership anymore. Naturally, Cinder tries to intimidate him the way she did before, but Adam calls her bluff. Maybe it's just pent-up frustration making him more aggressive, but he thinks he can take her in a fight this time around. In any case, he's willing to try. So Cinder switches tactics, using what she knows about his connections to Blake and Weiss to convince him that he needs to try for a rematch. That, if nothing else, he should be ashamed to let those freshman huntresses show him up like that. And this does work on him a little, enough to get him to agree to stay. But in return, he insists that the rest of the White Fang be allowed to leave. This scene was actually pretty jokey in the original script, but there are two main reasons for it to exist. The first is to show that Cinder can still be crafty and manipulative even when she's angry. showing that it's an actual skill and character trait for her, and not just a surface-level style in which to write her lines. The second is to show that Adam actually recognizes that he's a leader of an organization that exists outside of himself. Like, even if he personally wants to stay at Beacon, he should know that the rest of the White Fang staying there is pointless and will only further damage their cause. They have better things to do with their time and their lives, and above all, he can't let Cinder start to think that they'll be at her service forever. So he basically gives her an ultimatum. Either she can let the White Fang go and keep him alone as an ally, or she can try to force them all to stay and have a pointless fight where either he could kill her, or she could kill him and lose the loyalty of the White Fang anyway. The better choice is clear, and the fact that he's willing to use himself as leverage to get the White Fang out of Beacon makes Adam look like someone who actually has a reasonable side, where you can see how he might have gained the respect of his people. Like, here's a pro writing tip for you. Usually when someone is a successful leader, there's a reason for it. Especially in a world like RWBY, where someone with crazy superpowers and a gunblade could easily just decide to kill you if they're unhappy with you. RWBY as a whole has a bad habit of portraying leadership as one person with agency having access to mindless followers, rather than a social contract that involves mutual trust and consideration. A leader trusts their followers to support them and remain loyal to them, and followers trust their leader to make them feel secure and to make decisions that benefit them. As long as you provide narrative evidence of that mutual trust, or the natural consequences of that trust being abused or broken, you will have a believable portrayal of leadership. On the other hand, if you just ignore everything and write with the assumption that the leader will lead and the followers will follow regardless of how they think or act, that's when you start running into problems. Anyway, at the end of this mini negotiation, Adam kinda takes the lead, deciding that the two of them will just go back to Beacon and kill Ozpin for real this time, and since he's not as stupid as Cinder, it'll probably be super easy, and he can just get it over with so he can leave. And as I'm sure you've already guessed, he's sadly mistaken. So Ozpin wrecks Adam and Cinder, like effortlessly. It's not even a fight. This is mostly for the sake of comedy, but it also showcases that these two young adults are way out of their league. They both think of themselves as especially powerful and important, but in the grand scheme of things they are small fish in a very big sea, and this reality only intensifies during this portion of their arc. It starts with them getting lectured by Watts, who has just arrived on the scene with Hazel and is now taking charge of the situation. This scene is also 90% comedy, and it was a lot of fun to write, even though its main purpose was exposition. Despite what RT wants you to think, exposition can be entertaining and often is, as long as you approach it with creativity. So I had Watts in here showing off his personality and explaining his motivations, which I will hopefully address in a future video, and also explaining Salem's goals, while not so subtly implying that Adam should stay on the team or face oblivion when the world comes to an end. So Adam is getting hit with all this new information at once, and just beginning to understand what Salem is, and he glances over at Cinder and she looks oddly tame. Like she has this meek, powerless expression on her face that he's never seen before, and it's like probably the closest he's come to starting to feel scared in a very long time. After this, the two characters split up for a bit. Cinder just goes off to sulk in private, I guess. Now that Hazel is going straight for Ozpin himself, and Watts already knows what she's been up to, it's officially too late for her to try and make up for her failure. She's missed her chance to prove her usefulness to Salem, and she's not 100% sure how her mother figure is going to react when she arrives. Meanwhile, Adam is similarly feeling lost. He's concerned about what he's gotten himself into, concerned about what he's gotten the White Fang into, and no longer certain if leaving is actually still possible. It's hard for him to accept the idea that what he thought was a bunch of weird anarchists turned out to be the secret inner circle of an Armageddon devil witch. But when he thinks back to what Watts said, and seeing Ozpin's true power firsthand, and even in the very beginning, when he initially turned Cinder away and then she came back with 10 times stronger fire powers out of nowhere, suddenly the pieces start to fall into place. And while he's walking around at night, thinking these things through, a random stranger taps him on the shoulder to let him know that he dropped his White Fang mask. And surprise, it's our main protagonist. Ruby Rose plays a fairly small but very important role in Adam's development as a character by doing what she does best, just being a friend. In case you didn't know, it's pretty widely accepted that RWBY was supposed to be a Paragon character. someone who experiences minimal character growth throughout the story because her true purpose is to facilitate the growth of everyone around her. Think back to her relationship with Penny in Volume 1, how she connected with her and helped her overcome her insecurities in just a few short interactions. That's honestly what she should have been doing for dozens more characters over the course of the whole series. The reason she instead decayed into a side character for a full decade is because the writers clearly lost interest in using her for that purpose. My guess is, having RWBY actually get involved with their diverse, growing cast and become a link between different character groups was way too difficult to write, compared to just having each character only talk to their assigned conversation partners. So they dropped it, neglected to give RWBY any additional characterization, and before we knew it, the main character was functionally written out of the show. In NeverFell, on the other hand, RWBY actually fulfills her role as a paragon by contributing to the other characters' development arcs. Like the writers of the actual show, I don't really enjoy spending time on her either, but at least I recognize her unique ability to uplift other people, and see it as a valuable tool that can actually make things easier for me when used in the right places. You can rely on contrivances and sudden stupidity to make characters change their behavior, or you can rely on a main character whose sole purpose is to get involved in other people's lives and try to make them better. In Adam's case, RWBY really doesn't do much at first. She just happens to meet up with him occasionally during her nightly Grim patrols, and fights alongside him. Adam doesn't tell her his name, so she doesn't know who he is. She just sees him as a new battle partner with a cool semblance. All the time they spend together is focused on combat and simple teamwork. And for Adam, this is almost like therapy. For the first time in his life, he's in an environment where nothing is expected of him. He doesn't have to be the leader. He doesn't have to be strong. He doesn't even have to fight if he doesn't want to. After a life so filled with pressure to protect himself, prove himself, and crush other people to stay on top, now he can finally relax and decompress, and engage in a friendly rivalry. Until, of course, Blake finally sees them together and immediately rushes in to save her teammate from her evil ex. But before we get to that part, something a little more important needs to happen first. So Salem finally arrives at Beacon in her giant whale. Obviously, this is a huge deal that has a dramatic effect on the environment, the rest of the cast, and all the citizens of Vale, but we're not talking about them today. We're staying focused on our central characters here. Now at this point, you may have noticed a pattern in the way Cinder and Adam are featured in this story. Cinder is tied to the main plot. The most important issues usually directly affect her. But we don't really see how she deals with them. She either jumps into a new activity or shuffles off screen whenever she starts to feel bad. On the other hand, Adam is basically just along for the ride in Cinder's story, but his emotional turmoil is always front and center. It's through him that we get to see how these issues can affect our villain characters. This is the point at which those roles start to expand. Adam is going to start getting involved in the main plot, and Cinder's emotions are going to start getting more screen time. This story beat begins when Cinder finally reappears to Adam after disappearing for several days. And to his surprise, she's gotten a bit of a makeover. She's now sporting a brand new blood-soaked Grim arm, which is clearly causing her a lot of pain. Adam is slightly majorly concerned by this, but decides not to question it. Cinder simply tells him that Salem wants to speak to him, so he just goes along with that. I think he might try to ask something vague about the arm on their way back to the whale, choosing his words carefully so it doesn't accidentally look like he cares about her or anything. To which Cinder would respond by explaining that Salem gave her the new arm as a quote-unquote gift, and that just like everything else Salem has given her throughout her life, it will make her stronger and more powerful. She finished by telling Adam that he should consider himself lucky Salem has taken an interest in him, and gratefully accept anything that she offers, probably in a weird, tired way that implies she's trying to convince both him and herself when she says it. So Adam comes face to face with Salem for the first time, and the Queen of Grim is being her usual calm and motherly self. She compliments his fighting strength and his accomplishments, and the fact that she's being so weirdly nice fills his head with frightening mixed signals, just as intended. He's also wondering why she seems to know so much about him, until Salem calls up a third party to join their little meeting, the High Leader of the White Fang, Sienna Khan. The ensuing discussion reveals that Adam very publicly allying his subset of the White Fang with Salem's cause ended up bringing both organizations closer together, with Salem recognizing their potential for causing conflict in Remnant and wanting to use it for her own purposes, and fellow extremist factions of the White Fang seeing an opportunity to harness Salem's power to help the Faunus. Basically, there's finally an effective authority in the world that isn't biased towards humanity, and Sienna believes that having it on their side is going to be a net benefit in the long run. So she and Salem have formed a sort of quiet alliance, promising the White Fang's cooperation in her future plans in return for Salem's favor and protection from Grimm. And before I go any further, I want to talk about this decision, because the White Fang rarely gets discussed seriously in RWBY criticism. My guess is that most people are afraid to touch it, so they just make jokes about Team RWBY beating up minorities, and they make jokes about Adam, and they call it a day. But I feel like that's symptomatic of the larger problem that made the White Fang into a joke in the first place. Like, if you're gonna approach these topics, you can't be afraid of them. And if you're afraid because you don't think you're educated enough about them, then get educated, or shine your spotlight on someone who is. Simply claiming that RT doesn't understand racism and refusing to elaborate isn't really a real criticism. And to be honest, it feels weirdly alienating that it seems to be the standard. Are there really so few RWBY fans who have a decent understanding of systemic discrimination? Or are our voices just not being heard? Anyway, enough soapbox. So the reason I decided to just go for it and ally Sienna Khan directly with Salem is to briefly call attention to the primary driver of discrimination. At its core, it's a power dynamic. It's being able to exert your will over people who aren't equipped or allowed to fight back, to the point where you can convince yourself and others that that's the natural state of the world. That's what people who fight discrimination of all kinds are up against. In the minds of their oppressors, they're basically trying to cause a paradigm shift, and that's why it's so difficult and why it's met with so much aggression. And that's why people have so many different ideas about what's necessary to free themselves, from the violent to the peaceful. There is no single 100% morally correct way to convince someone that you count as a real person, especially when it's in their interest to not believe you. Sienna's take on this dilemma is that what the Faunus need most is the ability to keep themselves safe in ways that humans can't control, or take away if they feel like it. In this case, rather than relying on weapons from the Schnee Dust Company, or relying on huntsmen who generally don't do anything about discrimination and clearly don't consider it a priority, she's instead going straight to the source of the Grimm and bargaining with her directly. It's like, hey, we both have issues with the status quo and the institutions that maintain it, and my faction in particular doesn't mind helping you take them down by force, so let's just work together. And in return, you can do something that no one else can. Take the single greatest threat to the people of Remnant away from us. In her mind, this will both help make more Faunus want to join the White Fang, and help shift that power dynamic that humans depend on in order to oppress them. They can create Faunus-led communities that are safer to live in, and give their species a real chance to lift itself up and thrive, rather than accepting menagerie as the best they can hope for. Of course, there are plenty of downsides to this idea, which Salem is probably counting on. Number 1, having Faunus activism become entangled with and eventually equated with the will of the Demon Witch Queen is not a good look, and will definitely garner some heated reactions from people across Remnant. Number 2, creating Faunus-led communities that are famously immune to Grimm could easily just end up putting a target on the backs of everyone who decides to live there. Just because racist humans can no longer count on attracting Grimm to those communities doesn't mean they can't destroy them anyway, and they may try harder now. And of course, number 3, the rest of the White Fang still exists. People like the Belladonnas and Blake herself, who is also an activist in Neverfell and leads her own small movement in Vale, are not going to be happy with what Adam and Sienna are doing to their image. They might not think gaining an advantage over humans vis-a-vis the Grimm is worth working with Salem. Basically, it's a question of who the lesser evil is, or whether it's even a good idea to rely on anyone but themselves. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of conflict over this, but that's a story for another day. The point of bringing all this up is, one of Salem's conditions for agreeing to this treaty is Adam's loyalty and cooperation. Now, would she actually backstab Sienna if Adam decided to betray her later on? I honestly doubt it. I think she's probably had her eyes on the White Fang ever since it was created, and it would take a lot for her to throw that alliance away. Nevertheless, she heavily implies to Adam that there will be consequences for his people if he steps out of line. As you might have guessed, Adam is conflicted in like a dozen different ways. He doesn't want to spend the rest of his life working for Salem. He's never really wanted to work for anyone, and after taking a mini vacation and hunting Grimm with RWBY for a couple days, he's starting to become uncertain about the direction of his life in general. Essentially, he suddenly started to feel good once he was separated from everything he valued and worked for his entire life, and the disturbing implications of that are finally sinking in. Like, did he not like what he was doing? Does he not want to lead the Faunus anymore? Has he changed somehow? Or is there something about himself that needs to change now that he's noticed this? Long story short, it's the worst possible time for him to have to decide whether he wants to lock himself into a lifelong mercenary contract. Fortunately, or unfortunately, he doesn't actually have a real choice in the matter. Both Salem and Sienna have made it clear that yes is the only acceptable answer to this proposition. And since Adam sees Sienna as a respected mentor, and sees Salem as an unfathomable threat that could, at the very least, do the same thing that Ozpin did and effortlessly obliterate him, once again he decides to just go along with it. Right then and there, Adam receives his first official mission as a member of Salem's inner circle. Since Ironwood is still in Vale having an existential crisis, the time is right to strike in Atlas and destabilize things up there. Considering the historically high levels of Faunus discrimination and wage slavery in the kingdom, introducing a prominent White Fang member like Adam to the situation would be like tossing a lit match into a gasoline tank. With her direction and guidance, Salem is pretty confident that he could be the key to taking down Atlas and throwing the world into chaos as half its precious kingdoms fall to ruin practically at the same time. Adam is supposed to leave right away, but he's honestly too depressed and frustrated to even reckon with that. Instead, he decides to hang around in Vale for just one more day, trying to decide whether he's really going to let himself take this next step, because once he does take it, he's got a sinking feeling that there will be no turning back. For the first time, we're going to have a brief story beat explicitly from Cinder's point of view. Now that Adam's finished his meeting with Salem, it's Cinder's turn, and she flashes back to the horrifying experience of receiving her grim arm as she waits for her demon godmother to speak. Salem asks how Cinder's adjusting to the new arm, and Cinder lies and says it's fine. Salem knows she's lying, but doesn't care. If anything, she finds it entertaining that, just like Adam, Cinder is trying so hard to put up a brave face. Salem explains a bit about the science behind her Grimm experimentation, admitting that the Grimm don't synthesize well with normal human beings, as it's in their nature to just destroy them. She gets better results with her favorite sturdier test subjects, the silver-eyed warriors, who have a natural resistance to the Grimm and can survive much more intense modifications. She thanks Cinder for bringing Mercury to her and reveals that she's already begun experimenting on him, but she's a bit concerned about his altered mental state and expects to have difficulty controlling him. So now she wants to try to start over with a fresh new test subject, and thanks to Cinder's spying, she already knows of another silver-eyed warrior in the area, a young Beacon Academy huntress named RWBY Rose. Salem orders Cinder to capture RWBY and bring her in alive, considering it an easy task that she can use to start redeeming herself after the not fall with Beacon. Cinder thinks the same thing as she accepts the mission, and is looking forward to having a punching bag to take her anger out on, if only to distract her from the constant pain. Somewhere else in Vale, Adam is wandering the streets again just before sundown. He usually doesn't go out in public while it's still light out, but he's too distracted today to think about that. All day long he's been feeling awful without really understanding why. But since I'm the omniscient author, I can go ahead and tell you. His problem is that he feels humbled. That's such a foreign emotion to him at this point that he doesn't recognize it anymore. The whole point of his lifestyle is to be powerful and in control, and under normal circumstances he would simply cut down anyone who tried to make him feel otherwise. But these aren't normal circumstances, and recently he's been confronted with obstacle after obstacle that he can't just get rid of with his sword. He can't kill Cinder, can't kill Ozpin, can't kill Salem. He can't kill the pressure to live up to his vision of the White Fang, even at the cost of his own freedom. Conversely, he can't kill this strange new part of him that just wants to keep relaxing and hanging out and hunting Grimm for fun. And most frustratingly, he can't kill his past self who made that fateful deal with Cinder and got him into this mess in the first place. He knows, logically, the most sensible thing to do now is to follow Salem's orders and go to Atlas and do the revolutionary work he's famous for, the stuff he's good at, the stuff he's always done. But deep down, he doesn't want to, and there are tons of reasons why he doesn't want to, and he's going to have to ignore them all, to ignore himself if he's going to go through with it. and it's not normal for him to be in a position like this, and it feels humiliating. And while he's in the middle of this depressing realization, he runs into RWBY again, even though he really doesn't feel like talking to her at the moment. RWBY is her usual awkward, oblivious self, but she does notice that Adam's mood seems a bit more sour than usual, and tries to ask him what's going on. Of course, he won't tell her, but just the act of asking makes her realize just how little she knows about him. She decides to take a chance and ask him outright why he's never even told her his name, offering to help if he's in some kind of danger. But before he can come up with an answer to that, Blake Belladonna enters the scene. Unsurprisingly, she immediately assumes the worst, especially after hearing that Adam purposely hid his true identity from RWBY. She accuses him of targeting RWBY to get to her, still acting like a revenge-obsessed stalker after all this time. This forces us to recall that getting back at Blake was the original reason Adam stayed in Vale with Cinder's team, instead of leaving with the rest of the White Fang. It also forces us to recall that so many new issues have cropped up since then that it feels almost irrelevant. Blake should be the least of his problems now, and it's time to find out whether he's matured enough to realize that. Adam hangs back and plays defense for most of this conversation, mostly just reacting to RWBY's disbelief about being deceived this whole time, and pretending he doesn't care that his short-lived magical friendship with her is kind of ruined now. In the end, he successfully gets himself to admit that he doesn't care about Blake anymore. He's not hanging around Vale for her. In fact, he's not even thinking about her. Right now, he has more important things to deal with. Blake just scoffs at this, and I'd like to point out that this is one of the most cathartic parts of the script to write, because it finally allowed Blake to tell Adam off, to actually talk to him and criticize him as if she knows him. In Volume 5, we got a little bit of this, but Blake was way too aloof. You really didn't get the sense that she was speaking to someone who used to be part of her life, so her disrespect towards him didn't carry any weight. Instead, it felt like total apathy. And in Volume 6, all of her lines towards him were just worthless, boring cliches in response to his pathetically embarrassing cliches. Meanwhile, all I ever wanted was for her to just call him out. Show that she's grown past him by saying all the things she never got to say before when she still cared about his opinion. Let Blake call Adam spiteful and petty to his face instead of in a dry monologue. Let her tell him he's ruined what her parents fought for, and warn him to stay out of her life or face the consequences because she's a badass huntress who knows her worth now. Let her finally vent her true feelings in a situation where he can't shut her up and he can't intimidate her anymore. Like, maybe it's not as mature or #girlboss for her to actually care about Adam's actions and be angry with him, but sometimes we don't want characters to be mature. Sometimes we want them to be real, and real people don't just let go of things for the sake of a simplified plot. Now, Adam doesn't have a lot to say in response to Blake's little outburst. He didn't really realize he had that much of an effect on her. He just saw her as a reliable pawn who would do what he wanted as long as he entertained the idea of sharing her romantic feelings. And, subtly convinced her that he was the only one in the world who truly understood her, and that if she didn't belong with the White Fang, she didn't belong anywhere. But, as he admitted, he's not interested in spending his energy on that anymore. In fact, he doesn't even see a reason to anymore. He doesn't really remember why he cared so much about Blake in the first place. He's still annoyed with her and wouldn't be opposed to killing her, but that desire to control her and keep her from leaving him has just mysteriously disappeared. It will probably take Adam a few years to puzzle that one out. But once again, as the omniscient author, I can go ahead and tell you. He's just moved on. Considering that his whole life so far has been one big ongoing war effort, he's probably not familiar with the concept of moving on, but in this case it just happened without him even realizing it. All the big changes in his life that have taken place recently have changed his perspective and mindset a lot. For instance, he used to think he could achieve anything by being big and strong and scary enough, but after repeatedly getting stuck in unwanted situations by Cinder and Salem, he's realized that's not true anymore. He also used to think he could only be comfortable with friends he could control, but since he's been hanging out with RWBY as an anonymous stranger and feeling more at peace than ever, he's realized that's not true anymore either. And this is probably the main reason why his fixation on Blake has suddenly evaporated. Of course, this doesn't make him feel relieved or anything. If anything, it makes him feel unsettled, almost embarrassed, like he just wants to get away from her now. So he doesn't bother trying to argue with Blake about what she thinks of him. Instead, he just leaves her with a vague remark about the more important things he's doing now. merely hinting to Blake that the White Fang is getting involved with a higher power. He presents it in a positive light, as if he's trying to convince both her and himself that this is a good thing and an inspiring turn of events. But secretly, this is actually the moment that convinces him he can't go through with it. Like, even as he's saying it, he doesn't believe it, and if he can't believe in it, then he can't fight for it. The consequences may be dire, but he's just going to have to prepare himself to accept them. Much later that night, RWBY is out patrolling for Grimm again, this time without her battle partner. She still feels upset by the fact that Adam lied to her, and that she spent so much time having fun with someone who hurt Blake so much. But at the same time, she can't deny that she did have fun, and genuinely saw him as a friend, and that there were aspects of his personality that were good, maybe even kind. Basically, RWBY is learning that people are complex, and everyone has some good and bad sides to them, sides that you may never even be aware of until you hear about them from someone else. There's no such thing as pure evil or pure good. In conclusion, there is no such thing as a simple soul. She decides that she should probably just try to put the issue out of her mind for the time being. Little does she know, as she walks along, someone is watching her from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Cinder tries to shoot at RWBY with her bow and arrows. Unfortunately, her grim arm makes it difficult to aim, and she misses, alerting RWBY to the danger instead. So she tosses the bow aside and reveals herself, does a little monologuing, and uses her semblance and fire magic to truly begin the fight. Interestingly, this is both a higher and lower stakes encounter than it would be in the canon show. On the one hand, we know for certain that this version of Cinder is actually going to hurt RWBY and make her suffer, and we know what terrible fate will be awaiting her if she's successfully captured and brought to Salem. But on the other hand, Cinder and RWBY are still strangers to each other here. Cinder sees RWBY as just a random schoolgirl, and RWBY sees Cinder as another random schoolgirl that used to live in the same dorm. Of course, the fact that RWBY does recognize her from the Vital Festival just feeds into her current concerns. She realizes that this is another instance of a seemingly friendly person hiding a secret dark side, and now she's really starting to feel foolish for being so positive and trusting all the time. The poor girl's worldview is crumbling, and as you'd expect, this has a noticeable negative effect on her combat ability. And as she struggles against Cinder, Adam watches the scene from afar, trying to decide whether he wants to intervene. By now, he's had a couple hours to collect his thoughts, make plans, and start to gather supplies for his escape. He's also had time to think about his previous interaction with Blake and RWBY. Although he still resents Blake's accusations on principle, he can't deny that hurting RWBY to get to her is something that he might do, if he were still as angry as he used to be. And of course, if RWBY had known that, she wouldn't have wanted to hang around him. His friendship with RWBY, if you could even really call it that, depended completely on his anonymity. By its nature, it's fundamentally unsalvageable at this point. And besides, he didn't really care about it anyway. And yet, he can't help but wonder what RWBY thinks of him now. Does she hate him as much as Blake does? Does she forgive him? Does she even want to? How would she react to seeing him again? Has he ever worried about someone else's opinion like this before? Is this what it's actually like to have a friend, even an ex-friend? Meanwhile, Cinder is clearly gaining the upper hand in the battle. The burns RWBY suffered are only making things worse for her, and it's gotten to the point where she can't even use her semblance well enough to escape. Instead, she repeatedly collides with objects or drops her weapon mid-flight, leaving Cinder even more openings to attack. If Adam really wants to help RWBY, it's now or never. And so, even though it feels weird and wrong and will throw a huge wrench in his plans by directly exposing his treachery to Salem's right hand, he decides he can't just look the other way. As Cinder approaches to deliver the final blow, Adam suddenly jumps in her way and asks her what she's doing. Cinder, both surprised and annoyed, really doesn't think this is any of Adam's business and tells him so. Adam is clearly uncomfortable with this situation and can't think of a non-embarrassing reason to justify his involvement. And Cinder, being a skilled manipulator who can read people easily, immediately catches on to this and starts to laugh. She's genuinely amused to see the merciless Faunus revolutionary stepping in to rescue a random human girl. She admits she's heard about him going grim hunting with a beacon student. All of Salem's allies are under routine surveillance, and seeing as Adam was recruited by Cinder, she has permission to view the Seer Grimm's observations of him. And although she didn't think much of his extracurricular activities at the time, now she's realizing that the great Adam Torres has gone soft. Keeping company with weak humans who can't even fight for themselves? And for what? Is he that lonely without his White Fang soldiers? How pathetic. Adam is really dying of embarrassment at this point, but eventually he remembers to use the one social skill he's leaned on his entire life, to lie and bluster and make his actions seem much more meaningful than they actually are. He fires back at Cinder that she can laugh and call him soft all she wants, but at least he's not such a weak-willed, simpering coward that he lets Salem mutate him into a monster and pretend that it's some kind of reward. He declares that he's had enough of the Grim Witch and her followers, and that the true reason he's decided to confront her now is because he just can't leave without teaching her a lesson for trying to mess with the White Fang. Cinder sees right through that last lie, but she's too angry to care. Some of Adam's comments hit a little too close to home, and every second she lets him stand in her way is a chance for RWBY to escape. And besides, despite all their petty arguments and minor scuffles, she never got the opportunity to fight him seriously. Now, she's eager to actually get to hurt him and prove that she really is the most powerful. So we finally get the long-awaited fight scene between these two villains. Since Cinder doesn't have to worry about capturing Adam alive and can literally burn his face off if she wants to, she immediately becomes 500% more aggressive, which Adam admittedly wasn't prepared for. Since he's known Cinder, she's continually changed her skill sets and fighting styles, and he never got a chance to form a solid idea of what she was capable of. So now he has no choice but to figure that out in real time. Cinder, on the other hand, has had plenty of opportunities to observe Adam, and takes advantage of the fact that fire can't simply be deflected with a sword swing. Larger explosions will still burn him even if he tries to absorb them with his semblance. Because of this, Adam is forced to try to stay out of range, completely throwing off his close quarters combat style. And while he waits for an opening to strike, Cinder can wear him down with fire blasts from a distance. He tries unsuccessfully to shoot at her while he dodges, and for a brief moment he reflects on the fact that he used to rely on Blake in situations like this, to be the more chaotic, flexible partner with a wider range of abilities, who helps create opportunities for his precise attacks. And as if on cue, RWBY suddenly rejoins the battle. She's too injured to get up, but manages to snipe at Cinder with Crescent Rose in gun mode. And thanks to this distraction, Adam finally charges forward and lands a decent hit on Cinder, accidentally slicing off her grim arm. This is a complete surprise to both parties involved. Neither one of them expected Cinder to be dismembered so suddenly and easily, and as she screams and writhes in pain, Adam remembers that Grim don't have souls or aura, and that's probably why he was able to cut clean through the arm without even using his semblance. For the first time, Adam feels some genuine pity for her. He asks her, half under his breath, if all this is really worth it, and walks away to help RWBY. Hesitantly, RWBY accepts Adam's help to get back on her feet, returning Crescent Rose to scythe mode so she can use it as a walking stick. She thanks Adam for helping her, remarking that she knew he wasn't all bad. In fact, she thinks this is proof that he's changed for the better since he and Blake split up, and that maybe, with a little effort, he could get her to realize that too, and start to rebuild their friendship. Adam is actually very pissed off by this statement, but because he has changed for the better, just not in the way RWBY thinks, he decides not to yell at RWBY and call her an ignorant child. Instead, he simply says that there's nothing to rebuild between him and Blake. On the contrary, he thinks it's better for the both of them to just try to forget each other. RWBY isn't quite satisfied with that answer, but before she can argue against it, she's interrupted by a huge explosion of fire. The shockwave alone knocks them both to the ground, and Cinder's silhouette emerges from the flames. She appears to have managed to regrow her grim arm, and through the agony, she stretches it out further to grab RWBY and pull her in, demanding that Adam lay down his weapons and surrender. Adam instead calls her bluff, claiming that if she wanted to kill RWBY, she would have done it long before he got involved. Then he adds that she might as well give up. She can't take both of them at the same time, especially now that he knows her weakness. In response, Cinder uses her magic to set RWBY on fire, declaring that she knows his weakness too. Adam is shocked at this reversal, and as RWBY struggles in Cinder's grip and cries out in pain, he actually seems like he might let go of his sword. For the last time, Cinder's smug villain smirk returns to her face. She's convinced that she's won. And then, all of a sudden, RWBY's silver eyes activate, for the first time since she petrified the Wyvern Grim. Adam has no idea what's going on. He just sees a blinding flash of light and hears a scream, And then suddenly everyone's lying on the ground. RWBY is unconscious, and Cinder appears to be dead. She's not blinking or moving, and half her upper body has been reduced to ashes. He hears sirens in the distance. It seems that their battle finally attracted enough attention for someone to call the authorities, which means he can't stick around any longer. He decides to place Crescent Rose back in RWBY's arms and leave her for the emergency responders to find. Then he takes one last look at Cinder's assumed corpse and escapes into the night. A few days have passed since that battle. Somehow, Salem managed to retrieve Cinder's body and bring her back to the whale. And now, within her dark magic laboratory, she's working on bringing her back to full strength. Cinder is awake now, although she's very visibly weakened. She looks sickly and exhausted, and can't seem to move much more than her face. As she lies on the examination table, Salem tells her that she's failed twice now, and each time she's been forgiven. But on her third strike, she will have to be punished, and their working relationship will have to be reevaluated. Cinder barely has the strength to react to this subtle threat, although it's clear that she's very unhappily considering it. She's been trying so hard lately, and yet she's been met with failure at every turn. Her grand scheme to destroy Beacon, despite taking months to plan and execute, was a partial success at best. Despite the skill she thought she had gained with magic, Ozpin had no trouble beating her not once, but twice. And despite accepting the pain of the Grimm modifications just to be able to use magic, in the end they turned out to be her greatest liability. In some ways, she feels like she's worse off than she was when Salem first found her. The sacrifices she's made aren't paying off. She starts to wonder if it's even worth it to keep going through this. Then she recognizes that thought as one of the last things Adam said to her and rejects it immediately. Just the idea of proving him right about her feels disgusting. He's nothing but a glorified gangster. He has no idea what it's like to be in her position. He ended up betraying Salem so fast, he didn't even get a chance to find out. But the fact remains that he betrayed her. He met with Salem face to face, understood the kind of power and influence she could wield, was probably given the opportunity of a lifetime to share in that power, and immediately abandoned it. Cinder is convinced it was simply an act of foolishness. Someone like Adam Taurus would probably think he could just fight his way out of the consequences, despite all the evidence to the contrary. He'd go back to the White Fang and try to pick up right where he left off, ignoring the fact that Salem now has influence within the organization, ignoring the fact that many Faunus revolutionaries would kill for the opportunity to take his place. He'd probably end up dead within the year. Thinking about Adam getting exactly what he deserves helps Cinder to relax a little, but she can't deny that she feels envious of him in a strange way. She can't remember the last time she ever did something that foolish. The last time she realized how powerless she was and chose to risk everything anyway. Not since she was a child and she made the fateful decision to steal her signature red dress. It must be because, unlike Adam, she's not powerless anymore, she decides. But somehow that doesn't feel like the right answer. Salem finishes her preparations and asks Cinder if she's ready to do better this time around, as this is her last chance. Cinder is clearly having trouble using her voice, but Salem patiently waits for her to squeak out a raspy yes in reply. And with that, she begins to regrow the Grimm in Cinder's body. It's an excruciating procedure, especially since these new Grimm modifications must be more extensive to make up for the fused flesh that was lost. Now she needs both her arm and half her torso replaced with Grimm, forcing it to root itself even further into her body. At this point, her spinal cord and most of her internal organs will now be fully Grimm infected, and if she's ever hit point blank by Silver Eye powers again, she won't be likely to survive. After it's over, Salem holds Cinder's face in her hands, and assures her that she only pressures her because she truly cares for her, and wants her to achieve her deepest desire, to prove that she's grown beyond her past mistakes, that she will never be that weak, helpless servant girl ever again. And although her life now may seem just as painful, she's learning lessons through the pain that will make her stronger, like a diamond forged in hellfire. At the end of this pep talk, Salem hands Cinder a small box, presenting it as a gift. Cinder opens it, and inside is a tiny seer Grimm, which immediately reaches out to her face with its spiked tendrils. Nervously and hoarsely, Cinder asks what this is and what it's for. Salem simply replies that she wants Cinder to have everything she needs to succeed. and from now on, she'll be able to watch over her and help her at all times. The next day, Cinder is getting ready to leave on her new mission, to hunt down and kill the traitor Adam Taurus. She's not looking forward to having to face him again, knowing he's already seen her at her lowest point. Several low points, actually. She doesn't think it will be hard to kill him, especially now that he's probably traveling alone. And if he tries to mock her and act like he's better than her, this time he'll pay for it. But for some reason, that doesn't make her feel better. Although her left eye is still sore, she decides to cover it up with an eye patch. She never used to care about becoming half grim, but now she feels she would rather people didn't see her living prosthetics, especially not this latest one. Something about it feels especially uncomfortable, like it's too much a part of her, or rather, like it's not a part of her at all. To be honest, it takes all her strength and willpower to stop herself from frantically clawing it out of her face. It's a tension she recognizes from her childhood. She used to have the same feeling whenever she had to stop herself from stealing a hot meal, or beating her stepsisters to a pulp, or simply walking out the door of the hotel without looking back. The whole point of her new life was to never feel that way again. All the years she spent taking orders from Salem, constantly struggling for power and trying to impress her, all of that was so she'd never have to keep herself from something she desperately wanted ever again. And yet... Suddenly, Cinder feels overwhelmed. She can't hold herself back anymore. No matter how Salem reacts, no matter what the consequences are, that grim eye has to come out. She tries to seize it with the claws on her grim arm, but for some reason she can't move the arm anymore. It's as if some outside force is holding it back. Too desperate to be horrified, she immediately switches to her human arm, grabbing one of her swords. But then her grim arm grabs her human arm, stopping the blade from reaching her face. As Cinder struggles against her own grip, she feels a familiar pain under her skin, and realizes that the grim-infused flesh is spreading further through her body in real time, apparently trying to bring her rogue human arm under control. As soon as she feels its shoulders start to stiffen, she drops the sword, giving up. The seer grim shifts slightly in place, satisfied with having protected itself. From her other eye, a cold tear slowly rolls down her face. Far north, in the NeverFell Forest, Adam's new journey is well underway. Currently, he's searching for any remnant of the White Fang encampment he left there, hoping he can get to them before someone from Salem's side does. He's decided that his new objective will be to stop Salem from getting her claws into the White Fang, even if it means confronting High Leader Khan directly and overthrowing her. And if he's going to do that, he's gonna need his soldiers back. He feels a lot better now that he's finally leaving Vale. Calmer and more at peace, like he's about to start his life over again. Last time he was in this forest, Blake left him, and soon after that he met Cinder for the first time. He was a different person back then. This time around, he's going to make better decisions and become a truly unshakable leader. For one thing, he decides he's not going to share his life with anyone like he did with Blake, ever again. In his mind, the liabilities of having any kind of relationship far outweigh the benefits. Even his casual friendship with RWBY ended up costing him. He still has burn scars on his skin from that fight with Cinder. And speaking of Cinder, he decides his top priority should be to learn to outsmart people like her, so he never gets caught in another mess like the not fall of Beacon. He always hated how she seemed to see right through him, knowing everything he was thinking and feeling, especially since she clearly isn't all that smart. Sauntering around acting smug while blindly following her master's orders, fully convinced that Salem's power and authority counted as her own. In Adam's mind, someone like that would have to be an idiot. He does hate Cinder, he's certain of that, but at the same time, he can't help but be intrigued by her, with her mismatched skills and motivations. She talks constantly about wanting power, and yet she seems much more accustomed to operating within existing structures of power, risking the lives of the weak on the goals of the strong, while sitting comfortably in the middle. Meanwhile, despite the fact that he also wants power, Adam doesn't really like having to deal with followers or authorities on a daily basis. Recently, he started to feel like he prefers to work by himself, even though being a lone wolf really doesn't mesh well with his ultimate goal of societal revolution. It's as if the two of them are equal and opposites, both wanting things they can't reach without the skills and inclinations the other has. Maybe if they'd been allies for a little longer, maybe they could have learned something from each other. He steps into a clearing, thinking about stopping for a rest. But the second he takes off his traveling bag, the tree line suddenly erupts into flame, surrounding him with a wall of fire. Cinder enters through the flames, similarly to how she did during their last battle, but this time around, she looks almost like a different person. Her hair is shorter now, and she's wearing an eye patch and skin-tight black clothes, in stark contrast to the flashy, flowing dresses she used to wear before. Her legs and grim arm are now encased in translucent, glass-like armor. Adam doesn't even bother to ask Cinder what she's doing. Instead, he simply readies his sword, and says he's surprised she's still alive. Cinder says she's surprised he thought he could get away with betraying Salem. In an unusually sincere tone of voice, she warns him that she has followers all over Remnant, and asks if he truly believes he can escape her wrath. Adam considers this for a second, and then says that all he knows is he's never going back to being a slave, consequences be damned. That if he can't even stand by that principle now, everything he's done in his life will have been for nothing. Cinder pauses for a moment, and then says that she agrees with him. But, she adds, she doesn't feel enslaved by Salem. On the contrary, she feels loved, she feels capable, and she feels free to crush lowly, filthy animals like him whenever she sees fit. Adam is immediately incensed by this statement, but he can't help but feel like there's something off about the way Cinder is speaking, something besides her raspy voice. Her usual sanctimonious, sultry mannerisms are gone. She doesn't seem to be angry either. Instead, she looks calm, almost like she's in a trance. As she approaches him, her one visible eye looks blank and lifeless, and it's unnerving to watch. With her human hand, she removes one of her swords from her belt, and tells Adam that she's been sent here to kill him, and make sure there are no remains left to find. No one will know what happened, and no one will care. He'll simply disappear and fade into obscurity. But if he'd rather avoid this tragic fate, Salem might be willing to give him a second chance. All he has to do is humble himself before her, beg her forgiveness, and accept her gift. To illustrate her point, Cinder removes her eye patch, revealing the tiny seer grim embedded in her eye socket. Adam is both repulsed and disturbed, but quickly regains his composure. Quietly, he says he should have put her out of her misery when he had the chance. Cinder just smiles and charges forward. During this fight, Cinder doesn't use any fire magic at all. Instead, she relies only on her sword, and uses her armored grim arm as a shield when necessary. And again, Adam feels like something is off about this. Even back when all she had was a slightly upgraded heat semblance, Cinder never shied away from using fire during the fight. And now all of a sudden she's satisfied just having it around as a barrier. In the back of his mind, he begins to suspect that she's trying to tell him something, that all this incongruent behavior is some kind of hidden message. Then he dismisses the thought, thinking it's much more likely that she's trying to psych him out. After all, he didn't do very well during their last encounter, and probably would have lost without RWBY's assistance. Cinder probably changed fighting styles on purpose just to subvert his expectations, intending to tire him out with swordplay and finish him off with fire blast later on. So he decides he won't give her that chance, and starts putting in extra effort to target her grim arm, hoping to break its armor and quickly end the fight from there. Cinder seems to notice what he's doing, but doesn't change tactics at all. She continues using the arm to guard, almost as if she wants him to hit it. And at this point, Adam is certain that she's up to something. Either that grim arm is packed with explosives, or she really is trying to send him a message. What that message could be, however, he doesn't know. Smoke from the forest fire starts to fill the air, making it harder to see and breathe. So finally, Adam decides to take the initiative and force her hand, hitting the arm point blank with a moon slice. The armor shatters and goes flying, and unsurprisingly, Cinder seems to have been expecting this. She immediately recovers, turns around, and uses the grim arm to grab his throat. The arm alone is now strong enough to both strangle him and pin him to the ground. In a panic, Adam flips his sword grip and tries to stab it, but Cinder catches his wrist, finally using her semblance to make up for their difference in strength. Between the grim arm's vice-like grip, the thickening smoke, and the pressure of Cinder kneeling on his chest, he's already feeling lightheaded. And in what he believes are the last few seconds of his life, he searches her eyes desperately for some kind of direction. If she really has been trying to send him some secret message, it may now be his only hope. Cinder stares back at him and asks him, "What's the matter? Why don't you finish what you started? Put me out of my misery." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she turns Adam's wrist with her human hand, angling the blade of his sword towards her seer grim eye. Adam notices this, waits for her to turn off her semblance, and stabs. Several months later, Adam is traveling alone through the tundra of Solitas, still searching for members of the White Fang. But now he plans to kill them, not to lead them. Unfortunately, he never did get his soldiers back. From the little information he was able to gather during his time on the road, his faction was plagued with infighting and splintered soon after he left them. Half of them decided to follow one of his lieutenants, and those who refused were eventually absorbed into a group led by a pair of religious leaders, known as the Albane brothers. According to their ideology, the Grimm were created to punish mankind specifically, as they were the original people of Remnants who drove their own gods away. Faunus are simply innocent bystanders in this ancient war, should consider Grimm their guardians against the evil of humans. It's rumored that this is why Faunus revolutionaries throughout history have worn Grimm masks. Previously, this group simply operated in the orbit of the White Fang, largely written off as crazy people who sacrificed their own to the Grimm in creepy rituals. But now, Salem's involvement with the White Fang has given them a huge boost in legitimacy, making them the newest officially recognized faction of the organization. With the promise of protection from Grimm, more Faunus than ever are joining their ranks, making it difficult for anyone outside of the established hierarchy to gain traction or influence. And now that Adam has effectively been ostracized from the organization, this includes him as well. Most White Fang members he meets these days are hostile to him. Apparently, the word on the street is that he sold out to humans, forcing his own soldiers to fight and die for them before ultimately abandoning them, which is unfortunately too close to the truth for him to dispute effectively. And no matter how hard he tries to get people to realize that the human he supposedly sold out to is the same goddess they flock to for protection, no one is willing to listen to him. Many even go out of their way to try to kill him, hoping to hang the mask of the once great Adam Taurus on their walls as a trophy. Bitter doesn't even begin to describe how Adam feels about this. After all he went through to escape from Salem, it seems like it wasn't even worth it in the end. The moment he decided to follow Cinder to Vale, he'd already sealed his fate. He curses the day he met her, and yet he's still haunted by the sound of her screams when he cut out her eye in that burning forest. Every once in a while, he wonders what Cinder's doing now, where she went, whether she's even still alive. And if she is alive, he hopes she's suffering as much as he is, always on the run, forced to defend himself from people who once would have followed him into hell. And yet, still nobly trying to rescue the White Fang from itself, whether they appreciate it or not. For the last few weeks, he's been carefully tracking the Albane brothers, plotting their assassination. Every few days, they leave their recruits and go off to some secluded spot to speak with Salem alone, usually through a seer grim. Today, however, they didn't meet with anyone. Instead, they packed bags and journeyed far into the tundra. At this point, Adam has been tracking them for miles, wondering what they're up to. Eventually, the Albane brothers disappear over a snowbank, and Adam approaches slowly, hoping it isn't a trap. Instead, as he peers over the ledge, he finds something totally unexpected, a waterfall leading down to a river running through a lush green valley. He's already lost sight of the brothers, but he's too distracted to even think about that, as he descends the cliff and looks around. Although he didn't exactly get the best education, he's pretty sure all this grass and shrubbery isn't supposed to exist in the cold of Solitas. Even the air feels warmer, as if he suddenly stepped into a different world. He decides to follow the river, trying to stay hidden behind the tiny bushes and young trees, which seem to have sprung up from a natural deposit of plant dust. It gets continually warmer as he goes, and when he reaches the lake at the end of the river, he soon finds the source of all the heat. Cinder Fall, sitting on the shore, talking to the Albane brothers. It doesn't seem to be a friendly conversation. In fact, it's hard to tell if Cinder's even saying anything. She keeps her back to them, facing the water, and only her grim hand moves, scraping its claws back and forth over the ground. Suddenly, a fire glyph flares up behind her, and the brothers jump back, drawing their weapons. But before they can retaliate, everyone's attention is drawn to the surface of the lake, where a dark cloud is gathering over the water. Eventually, Salem, in the flesh, emerges from the black mist. Her voice is loud enough for Adam to hear, and he listens as she greets Cinder warmly, telling her not to be afraid. Nothing's going to happen to her that she doesn't already expect. One of the Albane brothers asks her a question, and Salem says they'll be able to control Cinder very easily once her transformation is complete. That she was born and raised to be an obedient servant, and no matter how hard she tries to fight it, that's all she'll ever be. On cue, Cinder's grim arm explodes outward and she doubles over in pain, screaming uncontrollably just the way she did the last time Adam saw her. For some reason, this makes him feel sick, and he reaches for his sword, preparing to take the biggest gamble of his life. From Cinder's perspective, a blinding flash of red suddenly illuminates her surroundings, singeing the back of her neck as blood splatters over her shoulders. The pain subsides, and she looks up. Fennec Albane is nearly unrecognizable. If it weren't for his ears, it would be hard to tell which half of his body was which. Corsic Albane's body is still intact. Apparently, he had a little more aura left, but given the severity of his wounds, he doesn't seem much more likely to survive. A few yards away, Salem has been reduced to a seemingly unresponsive puddle of grim ooze, slowly leaching into the water. And standing over it is Adam Taurus, resheathing his sword. He tells Cinder this is the second time he saved her, and that if he were her, he'd be embarrassed. Cinder just stares at him in disbelief. Adam continues, explaining that he didn't rescue her just to be nice. In truth, he's hoping they could form an alliance. They have a common enemy, after all, and at this point she owes him. Slowly, Cinder stands up, reforming her grim arm, and asks him if he's actually lost his mind. This is not the response Adam was expecting, and for a split second he feels enraged. It's her fault he's even in this position to begin with. But the past few months have taught him a lot about how not to win people over, and he quickly recovers. He tells Cinder that she's the one who's lost her mind if she thinks she can survive like this, disappearing into the wilderness like some kind of cryptid, waiting for Salem to inevitably catch up with her. What happened today is just going to keep happening until she finally does something about it. Why should someone with the power to terraform an icy wasteland have to live in hiding? She can do better than this, both of them can. They just need an opportunity to rebuild themselves, to claw their way back to the top, and it'll be a lot easier if they work together. He admits that he's been struggling on his own lately, and that even successfully killing the Albane brothers could easily backfire on him in the future. Nevertheless, he's determined to take back the White Fang no matter what it takes, and if she'll help him reach his goals, he'll help her reach hers. Cinder pauses for a moment, considering it. Quietly, she tells Adam that he can't help her with anything. She doesn't have goals anymore. She's just a wretched beast, and the only thing she can realistically look forward to is to die as one. Adam considers this, then replies that a lot of people once said the same things about him, but he's gonna prove them wrong, and if she had any pride left, she'd do the same, instead of sitting around feeling sorry for herself. He reminds her that he's only offering her this partnership because he still harbors some respect for her. He might not think much of her lifestyle or her personality, but he can at least admit that she's a shrewd negotiator and a skilled warrior. Or at least, she used to be. If that version of Cinderfall really doesn't exist anymore, then all she has to do is say so, and he'll drop the whole thing. At first, Cinder just glares at him. Then, suddenly, she grabs him by the collar and throws him aside, allowing the cluster of grim arms emerging from the lake to seize her instead. She struggles against them as they dig into her flesh, trying to drag her into the water, until her semblance finally manages to burn them off. Switching to magic, she blasts the lake with fireballs until it boils over in an explosion of steam, and continues until the rocks on the lake bed begin to melt. By the time she finishes, there's nothing left but a glowing crater, surrounded by charred vegetation. As the dry grass begins to catch fire, she turns back to Adam and says that if he needs her that badly, she'll try to help him out, if he'll try harder not to die from now on. Now that the main story is over, it's time to go through the designs, and there are plenty of them. First up are Adam and Cinder's original NeverFell designs, which I came up with a long time ago when I first started working on this video script. The goal here was to make Adam look a little less serious and make Cinder look a little more serious, in accordance with the subtle changes I made to their personalities. Adam's design is brightened up with the open jacket, white shirt, and the playful red shoes and gloves, and Cinder's design is aggressively darkened, replacing her trademark yellow embroidery with black flames, and adding some edgy eye makeup. Next up, RWBY's NeverFell design, created to pay tribute to her Volume 1 look while mixing things up a bit with some bold choices, like the half-shaved hair and the cowboy boots. This is essentially my answer to RWBY's Volume 7 design, showing that you can make her look dramatically different and evolved, without completely abandoning her unique fashion sense. We also have Blake's NeverFell design, part of the same collection as RWBY's. I struggled with it a lot back when I first designed it, but once I decided to put the bow on the side of her head and add the gold accents, I think it came together pretty well. Top is a little risque, but I like it a lot. The isolated coattails look surprisingly fun, and her bright magenta eye makeup is the cherry on top. Next, we got Adam and Cinder's rematch outfits, featuring Adam in a new traveling jacket and climbing boots, and Cinder in an all-black look to match her despair at this point in the story, but with the crazy glass armor and red eyeshadow hinting that she's not done fighting yet. By the way, writing Cinder maneuvering Adam into taking out her eye was probably the most impactful part of the story for me. I spent multiple hours on every draft of that one scene. It's almost intimate in a strange way. It really showcases how these characters who don't like each other and barely even respect each other can still have a sort of unspoken connection, just by each knowing how the other tends to think and act, and trusting that knowledge to save them. Anyway, after that we have the epilogue outfits, where both characters are at their lowest and basically cobbling together rags to survive. Despite dropping a lot of money on his coat from last time, Adam's now forced to dismantle it and cover it up for the sake of camouflage in the snow. Cinder, on the other hand, is just vibing in the little that's left of her suit and armor, since she tends to just use magic to stay warm. Having her find a deposit of plant dust in the middle of Solitas and use it to grow herself a little private forest was one of my favorite ideas. I think it's a striking visual that really emphasizes the skill she's gained with magic over the course of the story. Skill that will become very useful to her and many others in the future. Which brings me to the post-epilogue outfits, and the true finale of this little tale. I really let loose with Adam's new design this time around. In fact, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't recognize him. Throughout these designs, his hair has slowly been getting less red. I assume that in his case it's dye and not anime hair, so if he doesn't replace the color, it should just grow out. And at this point, it's pretty much gone, along with his signature manic pompadour hairstyle. Add a little facial hair and a new scar, and he almost looks like a different guy. His clothes are also toned down a little bit, veering away from his usual sharp Yakuza style into a more casual, disheveled direction, slightly reminiscent of a reanimated corpse. I want him to still look edgy and intimidating, but also relaxed, like his revolutionary work is finally more of a lifestyle and less of a performance. As for Cinder, she's a lot more recognizable. After we watched her flames slowly burn out over the course of the story, finally she's back in brilliant red, sprinkled with glassy golden accents. I wanted her to look stylish and modern, but also mysterious and fantastical at the same time. I feel like that's the essence of Cinder's style. I also wanted her to look a little more approachable, with the simple hoop earrings and this oddly normal-looking sweater dress. For the first time, she feels like she might actually be a regular person underneath the evil vixen persona. Now, are these drastic design changes meant to imply that these two go through some kind of redemption arc after the events of the story? Not exactly. There is a character arc happening, I just don't think it's a redemption necessarily. Feel free to disagree with me on that, but here's how it goes. So, fortunately for Adam and Cinder, Salem never gets around to hunting them down and murdering them after they officially team up, because this happens to be around the time when she gets into that final fight with Ozpin, killing him, breaking her curse, and ascending into the afterlife, or however it works. This is something I discussed in my Salem video way back when, in case you don't remember. But yeah, Salem's out of the picture, which means her dealings with the White Fang are null and void. The Grimm still exist, but no one is around to prevent them from hurting anyone, humans or Faunus, as far as they know. On top of that, the gods are back and magic is returning to Remnant, which primarily manifests by making dust more volatile and more dangerous to work with, destabilizing the Schnee Dust Company and the Atlas labor economy. Those who can find less lethal work outside the mines are now unlikely to apply, and those who can't are in more danger than ever before. And this is exactly the kind of opportunity Adam's been waiting for. While he was exiled from the White Fang, he got a lot of chances to think about how he got into it in the first place, where his path to leadership began. And he decided that his personal conflict with the Schnee Dust Company had always been at the center of everything. In the early days, people could look at the brand on his face and immediately tell that he meant business. And later on, he became one of the few people bold enough and strong enough to steal directly from the company itself, redistributing its wealth by force. From beginning to end, it had always been him versus the SDC. There were other things about him that caught people's attention, of course. His style, his semblance, his willingness to kill. But the simple fact that he was fighting the good fight, facing down a century-old institution of violence and greed and actually winning, seemed to be his primary appeal. People followed him because they knew he would avenge them, that he'd strike fear into those who thought they were untouchable, that one day he'd bring that city in the sky crashing to the ground. Figuratively, of course. So if he can just make them realize that again, if he can dedicate himself to that fight again, maybe even, do a better job this time around, he believes he can win back the influence he once had. He can prove to his people that he's still their savior. However, as his new partner advises him, to avoid throwing a delicate situation even further into chaos, it might be best if he gets someone to vouch for him first. So, with some effort, he manages to track down Sienna Khan in Atlas, still waiting for instructions from Salem that will never come, and detains her long enough to explain his proposition. She and her forces should help him lead a general strike on the Schnee Dust Company. Getting her on board is no easy task, especially considering the negative reputation Adam's gained as of late. Confronting her in an alley with some kind of human grim mutant by his side doesn't help. But the aforementioned mutant taught him a lot about using social incentives to get people to do what he wants. So he frames his request as a way for Sienna to finally garner support from the quote-unquote legitimate side of the White Fang. People like the Belladonna Loyalists, for instance, who have distanced themselves from the main organization since she came to power. Because the SDC is historically an enemy of Faunus everywhere, this is a cause they can all get behind, uniting the White Fang and showing the people of Remnant the true power of Faunus solidarity. And while she rallies the workers and protects them through the strike, showing that she's not so different from Gera after all, if there's anything a little more unsavory that she wants done on the side, he and his associate will try to fit it into their schedule. Basically, Adam gets to do his usual revolutionary stuff, but with the backing of a more established leader to absorb the collateral damage and make him look more established by association, almost like his original setup. Of course, Sienna isn't particularly impressed with him anymore, but with both her and Adam leading the same fight, she can either waste time actively trying to get rid of him, or just let him be, reap all the socio-political benefits of his idea, and take advantage of his skills, along with the incredibly convenient magical powers of his mysterious associate. Obviously, this associate is Cinder, who's been grudgingly partnered with Adam for a while now. She mostly just follows him around silently, listening and observing, and only speaking when they're alone, which is very unusual for her. Part of it is because this is kinda his world, and she doesn't really know enough about Faunus culture or the workings of the White Fang to actually participate in discussions. Part of it is because she's still not 100% sure she even wants to be here. But part of it is also because it's surprisingly nice to be invisible for once, to be the advisor instead of the executive, to plan out negotiations and devise strategies, and simply nod approvingly as Adam carries them out, like an old master watching over her student. Despite his arrogance and theatrical behavior, which still causes problems occasionally, he actually seems willing to learn from her and genuinely respects her advice. It's a quiet kind of power she's never had before, and she enjoys it a lot more than she'll ever admit. Of course, she won't be able to stay in the background forever. As magic returns to Remnant, the few existing magic users become stronger in turn, and in Cinder's case, this basically makes her a demigoddess of fire, a valuable person to have around in the cold climate of Atlas. Any threats the SDC might make to cut off power or blame strikers for energy shortages have fewer teeth when there's a protector of Mantle around, to keep people alive and find magic-based solutions to problems. This is another kind of power Cinder's never had before, people actually liking her and seeing her as a hero. She feels unnerved by this at first, But once she gets used to it and starts to interact with the general public on a regular basis, finally she begins to wrap up her character arc and actually change as a person. I like to think of Cinder as a psychopath in the literal sense, someone with low empathy who doesn't really feel for people outside of herself. And while Salem exploited that quality to make her do monstrous things, now she can make peace with it and develop her own value system despite it. And making Atlas robber barons seethe while enjoying the benefits of having adoring fans feels like a pretty good start. She sees a lot of her childhood self in the people she protects, and she's willing to accept that catharsis as the beginnings of a moral code. The beginnings of a life where she finally uses her power for what she truly wants, not what someone else tells her to want. From here on out, Adam and Cinder have a long fight ahead of them, with a lot of trials and tribulations in store. As powerful as they are, especially together, they're not invincible. They've made plenty of enemies through their actions in the past and present. But at least now they can have hope for the future. They're in a much brighter place in their lives with countless possibilities, and that's more or less how the Neverfell AU as a whole is meant to feel. My intention isn't to stop the story of RWBY's world at Volume 3. It's actually to expand it, to take it beyond the ideas and limits that were placed on it after that point, that eventually strangled it to death. I think if the showrunners had given themselves more room to transform the world of RWBY like this, to continue to deconstruct the status quo and allow the characters to move forward with new roles and ideas, it could have led to a much better story. Thank you for watching, like, subscribe, whatever, and check out my Coffee page gallery to see the finished pictures in these videos. Till next time!